Consciousness is used to denote what you see, hear, and feel right now. Consciousness is an anomalous phenomenon, unlike other natural world phenomena. Everything except consciousness is objective. Consciousness, however, is subjective. It's completely isolated and detached, yet it cannot be observed externally. Simultaneously, we acknowledge consciousness as a natural phenomenon that does not abide by fundamental physical laws. Despite the complexity of studying it, defining consciousness is not difficult. It is the feeling of mental images and sensations. When you look at an object, an image forms in your mind. This is human thought. Physics or biology fail to explain thoughts and, consequently, consciousness. When hit by a car, one leaves an imprint on two things: the car and their brain. Surviving this situation leads to an internal, inaccessible experience that periodically resurfaces as an autobiographical memory. Understanding the structure and properties of our memory's flora and fauna without oversimplifying is challenging. Memories often consist not just of words. The inexpressible cannot be put into words. The inexpressible leads to the concepts of simplicity and indivisibility. Some basic concepts cannot be explained using more fundamental ones. For example, explaining what white or red means is impossible because we perceive light not as a wave of a certain length but as a specific color. Our perception of color indeed has names. The indivisibility of color, and thus consciousness, can be compared to the indivisibility of a quark. Therefore, both quarks and consciousness are fundamental. The difficulties in understanding our consciousness largely emerged from René Descartes, who divided the body and soul on poetic grounds. The body is a vessel, while the soul is the rational principle destined to battle the inner beast. According to Descartes, the soul is immaterial and cannot affect matter, yet interaction occurs. Opera singers hit the right note, and dancers' muscles contract precisely as the choreographer wishes. Even a pencil writing poetry, encoding thoughts on paper, moves based on the laws of physics. The issue arises as the monitor where the flow of your consciousness, your life, is displayed doesn't reside in any specific office or bedroom. It can't even be located in any section of your brain. The workspace of your consciousness is immaterial, yet it influences physical processes. This buried fundamental contradiction is what philosophers and neuroscientists yearn to resolve. The best way is to eliminate consciousness, claiming it doesn't exist. Checking the existence of a physical object is easy. You can touch it. However, this criterion doesn't work for consciousness, hence, it doesn't exist. Yet, the sensation of self doesn't vanish from this assumption. Thus, consciousness has no place in the naturalistic worldview, but we can't abandon this concept. The pain from a blade is real, yet from a philosophical ontological standpoint, we must declare consciousness a non-existent phenomenon. Moreover, many researchers assert that consciousness is simply an electrochemical process in the brain. So, consciousness is the brain? No, because, firstly, it requires demonstrating a flawless substitution of mental terms for neurological ones. Neuroscientists aren't concerned if conscious states have a subjective private aspect. They seek the neurological expression of these processes. However, these neurological data are still sensed by someone. Hence, explaining what we see, hear, and feel through neurobiological processes seems impossible, as if there is something beyond matter. Why does the functioning of the brain, which occurs for objective reasons, accompany a subjective and seemingly non-obligatory state? Why doesn't it happen in the dark? In reality, our body doesn't really need us. Food is digested without our intervention. Hormones enter the bloodstream automatically, and our heart beats at a rate of 4,500 beats per hour, propelling us into the future. We can contemplate our own existence and drive a car. Furthermore, we can even converse with someone, agree, and with our thoughts be in a different corner of the planet or even in the past. Right now, we have touched upon a boundary, a wall that an Australian philosopher named as the hard problem of consciousness. But before I tell you how this person revolutionized it, we need to understand the context. You probably didn't know that in 1994, when the book by neurologist Antonio Damasio titled Descartes, Error, was published, it became fashionable to criticize the great French philosopher, who posited, "I think, therefore I am," for slowing down the investigation of consciousness through neuroscience. The truth is that at that time, René didn't just make a mistake. He provoked intellectual chaos that would take scientists and philosophers hundreds of years to overcome. Receiving education at the urban college, René developed a habit of spending mornings in bed practicing meditation and reflection. According to Descartes, the thinking soul exists separately from the body and establishes a connection through a special port, the pineal gland. In Descartes' theory, when performing conscious body movements, the soul, or rather consciousness, directs flows of a particular force into the nerves of the necessary limbs, causing movement in space. In 1641, Meditations on First Philosophy was published. In this work, Descartes attempted to articulate the differences between the soul and the body. It was the first time that the concept of dualism, the eternal duality, was formulated. Dualism is the idea of the existence of two principles, the spiritual and the physical, both considered by René as separate substances. The main property of physical or corporeal substance is spatial extension. They are reducible to matter, while the spiritual substance embodies thinking. The body, unlike the soul, exists in space and represents a mechanism that can perform several functions without the soul's participation. We've already grasped that. Descartes considered animals as robots since their behavior is entirely explicable in terms of biological mechanisms. For him, they were beings of one substance, beings devoid of something. Descartes lived outside of time and, therefore, contemplated creating a machine that looks and acts like a human. However, given the technology available in the 17th century, he believed such a machine impossible. According to Descartes, robots identical to humans would still give away two things: an inability to creatively use language and an inability to maintain live non-verbal communication. Their eyes would betray them. In essence, he indirectly formulated the uncanny valley effect even before the Japanese roboticist Mori Masahiro. Of course, Cartesian dualism is one big contradiction. He himself pondered how the non-extended soul interacts with the extended body. According to Descartes, this is beyond our comprehension. In February 1650, returning home on an early, chilly morning after a lesson with the Queen, Descartes caught a cold. The cold developed into pneumonia, and just a week later, Descartes left the world where he usually meditated. By separating the concept of material and spiritual, Descartes created the most significant dead end in the history of philosophy. This caused science to get stuck in Cartesian deadlock for 300 years. The philosophical division of the cumbersome material body and the weightless substance of the mind was fatal. Philosophers intermittently threw themselves at Descartes' concept, proposing alternatives while natural sciences remained aloof. It was only in the 19th century, with the emergence of psychology and new knowledge about mental disorders, that neurologists and physiologists began to regard the brain as an ordinary organ, and the mind and thinking as its derivatives. Thinkers accepted this view, removed their lenses from the body-soul relationship, and focused on the connection between the brain and consciousness. At this moment, it became evident to everyone that the question of human consciousness required a new approach. One spring morning in 1994 in the U.S. state of Arizona, in Tucson, an unknown long-haired Australian stepped onto the stage and delivered a speech on consciousness. For the vast majority of scientists gathered at this conference, the question of consciousness was taboo. David Chalmers' first presentations turned out to be a complete failure. Frankly, they were absolutely incomprehensible and boring. I couldn't understand what he was talking about at all, recalls Stuart Hameroff, the professor responsible for the event. As the organizer, I kept looking around and saw people falling asleep from boredom. I started to worry, but the third presentation just before the coffee break changed everything. In a denim jacket with long disheveled hair, the 27-year-old philosopher Chalmers looked more like a misplaced fan of some obvious hard rock band. But as soon as he started talking about the problems of consciousness, everyone woke up. How we store in our memory, perceive, and take in information. Why do we sharply pull our hands away from fire or hear our name across a noisy party room? These are simple problems in their scope. They're just questions for exploring our brain. An approach to their solution is clear. But in this presentation, Chalmers formulated one truly difficult, almost unsolvable question. A couple of months after David's presentation, this question threw the scientific and philosophical community into unprecedented confusion since Descartes' time. They dubbed this confusion the hard problem of consciousness. Chalmers managed to draw the audience's attention with a unique framing of the question. During the break, I walked around as if I were a playwright at the premiere of a play, and everyone around me was exclaiming, "The hard problem of consciousness." That's why we're here. Philosophers pondered the relationship between the mind and body for centuries. But it was Chalmers who managed to look beyond philosophy and even science. After more than 20 years, we've learned a great deal about the brain. Following the news, every week one could read a lengthy article about discoveries in the field of brain knowledge. This is just what was popularly formulated. The sphere of studying and developing the capabilities of artificial intelligence, which essentially focuses on replicating the brain, has also made colossal progress. But Chalmers' hard problem has not been resolved. To understand the reason for the popularity of his hard problem, we need to delve into what actually happened at the Tucson conference. The main thing Chalmers did was to separate easy and hard problems of consciousness. The Tucson presentation secured global fame for this man. In the early 21st century, it's impossible to find a single book on consciousness that doesn't cite David Chalmers. What did he formulate, and why is everyone still talking about it? The secret lies in simplicity. According to Chalmers, there are two types of problems faced by any consciousness researcher. Simple problems succumb to empirical investigation. They are logical consequences of facts about brain function, much like understanding the workings of an engine helps understand its purpose. The real interest lies in the gradually encroaching cultural problem, the hard problem. The hard problem involves why processes in the brain, physical processes, are accompanied by subjective experience, or as it is termed in English-speaking philosophy, qualia. Subjective experience needs to be understood not just as images and sounds. Someone lives without these streams of information. Subjective experience is a stream of sensation, the quintessence of thoughts, images, associations, and emotions. In other words, the hard problem is the problem of explaining why the work of a specific biochemical mechanism, our brain, is accompanied by consciousness and us. As we've already understood, the body could manage without us. Why doesn't everything in the brain work for us in the dark? Resolving the hard problem of consciousness means figuring out how matter transitions beyond matter, because the trees or bridges that appear in your consciousness weigh nothing at home. All of this is nothing more than an interpretation of signals received by a specific brain. The objects you see don't exist in space. Any image is part of your personal experience. This part is the qualia. But why does this physical world, the universe, need this curtain and projection, this play process? Why does the physical world need I? Why did physical processes generate something as non-essential as human subjectivity? And why human? Because animals are simply automatons, whose vitality is imitated by internal reflexes. But they don't look at us, just as mountains or even trees don't. Perhaps animals also possess consciousness and subjectivity. It's difficult to define the boundaries of consciousness. Defining it from the simplest things eludes us like a slippery river fish. Does it realize itself and what's happening to it? Does a fish have consciousness? In 1997, psychologist Gordon Gallup had the idea to test the level of self-awareness in animals. Making a mark on the face of the subject and placing a mirror in front of them. Only a creature with high self-awareness could detect the mark. Humans at the age of 1.5 passed this test, and so did chimpanzees, gorillas, elephants, and magpies. After this experiment, debates about animal consciousness didn't quiet down for 42 years. And on July 7, 2012, 25 leading neurobiologists and neurophysiologists, psychiatrists from around the world gathered at the Dubin Hotel in Cambridge. Stephen Hawking was also among the guests. The session dragged on, and only at night did the scientists reach a unanimous decision. We declare the following. Lack of a neocortex is not an impediment for an organism to experience sensory states. Therefore, the weight of evidence shows that humans are not unique in possessing neurological mechanisms that generate consciousness. Non-human animals, including all mammals, birds, and many other creatures, also possess these neurological mechanisms. The significance of this event cannot be understated. 25 leading scientists officially signed a statement affirming that not only humans have consciousness. Consciousness gives meaning to life. If we weren't conscious, nothing in life would matter or hold value. The Cambridge Declaration should eventually lead to significant ethical changes. Why did life acquire consciousness? What is the purpose of this first-person experience? Why aren't we simply created as data processing robots? Why are we given the ability to feel? All these beautiful portraits attempted to solve the problem of consciousness, but perhaps only our Australian managed to get closer to the answer. Science, by its nature, is objective, that much we understand. After all, the emphasis on objective understanding has led us to create all the technical magic we're currently using. Newton's laws laid the foundation for mechanics, which allowed humans to expand the urban landscape. In the 19th century, engineers applied Newton's laws to explain the nature of heat, revealing that heat is just the movement of molecules. Engineers could use this knowledge. Water turned into steam, which then powered metal. The steam engine triumphed over the horse. Other rails encircled the globe, increasing the circulation of goods, people, information. Consciousness, however, is subjective, so it can't be dissected with empirical scalpels. It turns out that the understanding of consciousness can't be fundamentally scientific. This viewpoint prevailed for most of the 20th century. Chalmers believes that there are fundamental limitations in science, so he daringly throws himself into the problem. As we've already discovered, science is objective, but consciousness is not. In the 20th century, psychologists objectively studied behavior, neurobiologists objectively studied the brain. But no one ever seriously tackled consciousness. One might think to give science a couple more years, and then in a popular science media, read about how neurobiologists from some prestigious university solved the problem of consciousness by discovering new neural interactions. For instance, We know how living organisms reproduce, adapt, and undergo the process of metabolism. These are all processes of objective functioning. Based on the brain's configuration, we can explain how we walk, talk, and play football. But all these are questions of behavior, not consciousness. Chalmers' complex question is why behavior is accompanied by subjective experience. Why aren't we in a quiet, intangible, neutral non-existence, or simply in the dark, without the ability to think, remember, or reason? How does matter give rise to consciousness? And at this point, the neurobiological paradigm is powerless. We are accustomed to physics explaining chemistry, chemistry explaining biology, and biology partially explaining psychology, but it doesn't seem like consciousness fits into this scientific picture. Consciousness is a given, an anomaly, an exception to the rules. When faced with an anomaly, only a daring idea, similar to the one that occurred to Newton, can be a lifesaver. Fortunately, our David has tossed a few their way. The first idea goes like this: what if consciousness is fundamental? Physicists often take certain aspects of the universe as fundamental. For instance, space, time, or mass. Similarly, molecules consist of atoms, atoms consist of hadrons, and hadrons consist of quarks. Quarks cannot be further divided because they are bound by the law of confinement or confinement. These are the established principles of the universe. Fundamental concepts aid fundamental laws, like the laws of universal gravitation or quantum mechanics. Fundamental laws of the universe cannot be explained because it's impossible to understand fundamental things through more fundamental ones. We call everything indivisible elementary. A scientific model of the world is built upon understanding the elementary. Sometimes, the list of fundamental assumptions expands. For example, in the 19th century, Maxwell proved that electromagnetic phenomena couldn't be explained based on the existing fundamental foundations of physics, space-time, mass, and Newton's laws. Therefore, he derived the basic laws of electromagnetism. Consequently, the electric charge was accepted as a fundamental principle. The scientific model can be updated. Immaterial consciousness cannot be explained based on existing principles, space-time, mass, and charge. Then the phenomenon of consciousness needs to be parked with other fundamental principles of our universe. Next, it's simply a matter of deriving the laws governing consciousness and the laws connecting consciousness with the space-time continuum. That was the first daring idea, an idea of fundamentality. But there's also a second. What if consciousness is universal? And we can assume that any system, to some extent, possesses consciousness. This vision is called panpsychism. Based on this saving hypothesis, all systems possess their degree of consciousness. Panpsychism involves the idea that consciousness is the most important characteristic of physical matter, and each individual particle has its proto-consciousness. The aggregation of particles, under favorable circumstances, like what happened with life, leads to the complexity and expansion of consciousness potential. Perhaps the simplest and most effective way to define the fundamental laws of consciousness is to link it to the concept of information. Neurobiologist Giulio Tononi managed to fit consciousness into the scientific worldview with his theory of integrated information, becoming one of the most influential theories of consciousness in the 21st century. According to this theory, consciousness can be measured by defining the amount of integrated information. The generalization of informational signals is not unique to the human brain. Transistors resemble neurons in that they generalize incoming information and perform logical operations. Thus, this theory describes not only human consciousness but also what gives rise to artificial intelligence. The theory of integrated information suggests that different consciousnesses process and connect incoming information differently. Julia created a unit of measurement for the integration and processing of information, calling it phi. The phi indicator is closely linked to consciousness. In the human brain, the volume of information integration is incredibly vast. A high degree of phi can only exist in complex consciousness. Cats exhibit an average degree of information integration. When considering simpler life forms, we observe a decrease in the phi volume, but it never reaches zero. Even a proton can possess phi because it arises from the interaction of quarks. The theory of integrated information serves as a scientific basis for the ancient concept of panpsychism, an idea that, despite its age, appears to be quite accurate. The development of this theory may assist in incorporating consciousness into the realm of physical laws. Physicists and philosophers often note that physics, albeit abstract, describes the structure of reality using equations but does not reveal the reality lying at its core. According to Tononi, wherever information processing occurs, consciousness exists. Complex information processing, as in humans, leads to complex consciousness, while simple information processing results in simple consciousness. This pan-psychic view, according to Chalmers, has the potential to transform our relationship with the universe. In the theory of integrated information, there exists a concept that is complex to comprehend, known as exceptions. According to this, parts of the brain such as neurons, ganglia, the amygdala, and the visual cortex can possess a non-zero phi, implying that distinct brain regions have their mini-consciousness. However, due to the overall phi of the entire brain overshadowing all other mini-consciousnesses, we mostly feel unified within our bodies. Perhaps the brain still fears rebellion from these parts, which is why parasites terrify us. This point sparks intriguing thoughts. If a group of people starts communicating with utmost but achievable attentiveness, their group phi surpasses individual phi. Group consciousness exhibits a colossal advantage in problem solving. This is reminiscent of Pixar's famous production program, where authors present their work and discussions involving other creative leaders occur, contributing to the stable quality of Pixar's animated films. However, the theory doesn't explicitly state this. A group forms a decentralized consciousness, surpassing the consciousness concentrated in a single individual. In this remarkable context, a sect or a crowd becomes a sick organism. Every sect has rigid rules that preclude flexible collective reflection. If one believes in the absolute universality of panpsychism, one might question whether a business entity or an entire state possesses consciousness. This recalls the organic theory, suggesting that people naturally assemble like Power Rangers into something far greater, a colossal entity with its anatomy and physiology, undergoing stages of formation and aging. Viewing modern Earth from space, it becomes apparent that the planet is dominated by several colossal leviathans competing with other giants for the right to existence. Summing up, in 1994 in Arizona, David Chalmers formulated the simplicity and complexity of the problems of consciousness. According to Chalmers, simple problems are amenable to investigation as we already know a fair amount about the brain. But we still know nothing about consciousness. Why does this immaterial screen turn on? Moreover, we've arrived at radical conclusions that the level of consciousness is genuinely measurable, and the number phi becomes an objective unit of measurement, comparable to degrees Celsius and meters. Have these daring ideas allowed us to resolve the main problem of consciousness? It seems David Chalmers' ideas have helped us stitch the phenomenon of consciousness into the fabric of objective knowledge. Hence, an answer has been found. Yet, why did a person at a New York seminar proclaim themselves an official skeptic of the theory of integrated information, only to thank for their lunch not being poisoned? Could it be that everything is more complicated? Meet Scott Joel Aronson, an American computer scientist theorist openly opposing proponents of the theory of integrated information. Aronson's main objection is linked to the assertion that phi proves the presence of consciousness. Phi might be a necessary condition for consciousness but is certainly not sufficient. Here is the professional translation of the text into English. As the phi number is not an exhaustive indicator, the credibility of the integrated information theory is crumbling before our eyes. Additionally, Aronson believes that he can easily develop numerous simple systems with high phi values. For example, a two-dimensional grid launching error-correcting codes similar to those used in compact disks. According to Giulia Tononi's logic, disks possess an extraordinarily high phi, suggesting complex and comprehensive consciousness. However, the theory of integrated information inevitably predicts a vast number of consciousnesses in physical systems, none of which any sensible person would consider particularly conscious. Furthermore, the TEIIA not only predicts the consciousness of a system but also suggests that these systems should be more conscious than humans. In short, according to Aronson, the theory of integrated information lacks scientific rigor. Besides, Aronson ironically thanked the proponents of TEII for creating a sufficiently concrete and testable theory that he could easily debunk. Other theories are so vague and unspecific that they can only claim to be mistaken. Giulio Tononi ignored Aronson's criticism. We were prepared for extreme surprise. It turns out a programmer shattered Tononi and Chalmers' positions and came out on top, or did they? In reality, Aronson's reasoning collided with the solid barrier of the problem of other consciousnesses. The problem of other consciousnesses in this context signifies the inability to conceive of consciousness alternative to human consciousness. Humans sense their consciousness and perceive others. The logic is simple. People are like me, so they must also have consciousness. But I cannot imagine it existing in compact disks. Many steadfast Tononi supporters began to doubt their understanding and suggested creating a consciousness meter capable of determining phi and therefore the consciousness of any system, from iPhones to humans or snakes. Measurement would help embed consciousness into the physical world. However, once they started, they realized that such a tool is no more revealing than a tomograph. Brain scanners only assist in solving simple consciousness problems. Consciousness, as the complex feeling of that familiar space for thought, cannot be measured. Once again, we've missed it, and the answer has dissolved amidst a crowd of contradictions. Have we returned to where we began? With a simple question about the workings of the brain? Everything indicates that we're at an impasse. By journeying through this part with me, you've become a Mysterian, a person who acknowledges the unsolvability of the difficult problem of consciousness. But are the simple problems of consciousness really interesting? Why have we ignored what has been given to us all this time? We have been given our body, brain, and the direct invasive ether of our lives. Our personality is given to us. At this moment, I comprehend English speech. The well-known difficult problem of Chalmers can be reduced to the question, why are we not in the dark? Why do we feel all this diversity? Why are neurophysiological and physical processes accompanied by consciousness that cannot be explained like other natural phenomena? What if I told you that this question is fundamentally incorrect, and the brilliant Australian philosopher erred? What if David Chalmers and other philosophers grappling with the question of consciousness are engaging in beautiful but unproductive intellectual acrobatics, and the difficulty in the problem of consciousness doesn't exist? All this time, we intentionally avoided framing the question correctly to better understand the neurophilosophical context, because understanding the context helps us ask the right questions and ultimately find the answer in the crowd of thoughts. The right question is this: why was the light turned on for us?